My favorite part of the day is making coffee. The analog process grounds me. It provides a rhythmic start to each morning. I can be aware of the grind and the water dripping through the filter, yet I'm still in a state of meditative unconsciousness. Making and drinking coffee is a complete sensory experience. From rubbing my thumb across the coarse beans to the fresh smell of the grind to the eventual first warm sip. Coffee wakes me up in the morning because it completely engages my full humanity at the most important time of the day. So, what's so special about this bean that produces the nectar of the gods? Why has coffee stood the test of time? And what makes the perfect cup? You're listening to a podcast called Least Important Things. I'm your host, Luke Ferris.
Wait a minute. You know, this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee. I can't tell you how many cups of coffee in my life, and this is one of the best.
The origin of coffee starts with a goat. As legend has it, a goat farmer named Chaldee in ancient Ethiopia discovered coffee after noticing his goats eating berries off a tree that made them go wild with energy. Chaldee was shocked, so he brought it to the local truth-sayer monk in the village. That monk made a drink from his berry that allowed him to pray all day and night. The creation of this new drink traveled eastward to the Arabian Peninsula, and by the 15th century, it was grown, refined, and cultivated. By the 17th century, coffee had come to Europe, and the legend had grown of this black liquid's properties for energy. Fast forward to today, and coffee is a $200 billion industry, and it's estimated that humans drink 3 billion cups a day. The demand for this beverage results in 25 million farming households and at least 100 million families depending on coffee for their livelihoods. But besides growing, transporting, and consuming of the product, which most of us do, there's a critical element in the process of making coffee that makes up an entire sub-segment of the industry: roasters. For coffee to be drinkable, the beans and the berries need to be roasted, and that process of heating the beans is where the flavor and drinkability of coffee comes from. My friend Casey Lucas has been in the coffee business for 15 years. After college, he started working at a coffee shop in his hometown of Oakhurst, California, nestled just on the outskirts of Yosemite National Park. After working there for a while, the owners eventually decided to sell the place and offered Casey and his recent bride to buy it. Casey said, "Why not?" and began venturing into the world of coffee. It was during his 10 years of grinding as a retail owner that Casey first started roasting his own coffee. It started out as an experiment to see if he could match the bold flavors of his favorite roasters he'd sell at his coffee shop. But the experimentation quickly became an obsession, and eventually, he mastered the roasting process. So following the COVID pandemic, Casey decided to step back from slinging coffee and become a full-time independent roaster. His business, Reverent Coffee, offers a wide range of roasting flavors and locations, with coffee hailing from Ethiopia, Costa Rica, Papua New Guinea, El Salvador, and more. I decided that if I wanted to understand more about how coffee is made and why it matters, I need to speak to someone like Casey, who's been steeped in the business for years. I asked Casey to explain the step-by-step process of coffee roasting in layman's terms so I could understand it.
How it works is I import the coffee. I import it from a company that's really amazing about giving great traceability. So I get all the farmers' names, information, how the coffee is grown. It's like a very ethical company, meaning that farmers are paid super well. And that almost always goes hand in hand with great quality coffee too, because there's a lot of incentive for people to grow great coffee, being like little micro lot farmers, you know. Once it's ready to roast, that process is it's not simple. There's different adjustments that need to happen, but basically I have a big drum roaster. It's like a big old 12 kilo drum roaster. So I can make about 22 pounds at a time. And that process is pretty fast. It's like 11 to 12 minutes per batch, so you can quickly roast a couple 100 pounds of coffee. I try to describe it as almost like roasting like meats. Like there are times when you're roasting meat that you really want to like slow it down and you really want to let the inside cook at the same temperature as the outside or at the same rate as the outside. And so there's a lot of that with coffee roasting where you want to initially heat the coffee pretty quickly. So lots of heat, lots of energy, and you want to bring it up to some specific temperature milestones along the way. But then towards the end, you really want to slow it down to make sure that inner bean is developed. And that's what, do you ever drink coffee and it has like a pretty sweet aftertaste?
Yeah.
That's a good thing. That means that the coffee was developed appropriately, meaning that the inside of the bean was roasted to the same degree as the outside. It's like kind of almost, I think it's like the sugar compounds in the coffee give it that effect or something. And so, and if you have had the opposite where a coffee really hurts your stomach and it tastes kind of bitter, and that typically means the coffee was roasted too fast. So,
okay.
And there's a lot of reasons why people do that. Big companies do that. I'm sure we know who I'm talking about.
Company who shall not be named.
Yeah, they do that probably just because, you know, you save millions, if not more dollars, saving in gas and all kinds of stuff by shaving off time, right? So definitely like slowing it down at the end really makes like a sweeter cup. And there's a little bit of like different science that goes into like the different roasts that you do and stuff like that. But that's it in a nutshell.
How much is roasting affect the flavor? Is it like, give me a percentage? Is it like 50%? Because I feel like in my layman's head, there's 3 steps, big parts of coffee. It's obviously the sourcing the product, it's the roasting, and then it's how it's made. But how much is roasting part of that?
Oh, that's a good question, because you absolutely cannot make a bad lot of coffee taste good. So it is really important to buy great coffee. I would say it's pretty easy to ruin a great batch of coffee, rather. So like things that could ruin batch of coffee would be, you know, like what a sine wave on a graph would be.
Yeah.
Or like a S curve. Maybe that's a more appropriate. So that's kind of what you want like your roasting profile to look like, is kind of like that, like real steep initial rise and then tapers off and kind of forms that top of the S, right? So if at any point in time your temperature like stalls out, or the coffee does some like weird move where maybe it gets like really too hot super fast, then like, you know, the classic example is when you have the first crack during a light roast. That's what defines a light roast. It's like the coffee beans kind of like explode at that point, and they shed off like chaff and other stuff. Most people don't drink coffee before that point. Well, if you don't control that reaction and you want to roast coffee, like let's say to like a medium roast, you can have this massive temperature plummet as that crack happens, because it releases so much heat and the temperature spikes but then plummets. And things like that, if you don't control them, they can make a great lot of coffee taste kind of bad. Like you can get like baked bread, vegetal flavors, especially if you under roast a coffee. So all that to say, like, oh man, it's hard, because I can think of a bunch of different ways you could mess up like a great lot of coffee. But I also think that you have to do a pretty good job roasting coffee to make it taste good too. So
Right. You need all three parts probably, right?
Yeah. So maybe it's 50-50. I don't know. I mean, it depends on how you break it down, but it's kind of like, I know for a fact that I've messed some great coffees up before and been like, I didn't do that one very well, and then I roasted it again and I was like, that was one of the best cups of coffee I've ever had, So it's just kind of weird. I would say the roasting matters more than I would want it to.
Well, it's good. Yeah. That's why they pay you, right? That's what the reason why it makes so much value. Okay, moving on to that final phase. I know this is controversial, but is there a right way to make coffee? Do you think there's a specific because I feel like there's a lot of opinions. A lot of people are again, going back to that speed conversation, a lot of people are just trying to get the caffeine in their system. But you think there's a right way to make coffee?
Whoa. Yes and no. First of all, I will say people are going to drink coffee no matter what. It's become a ritual. You look at, all the different people who are diehard this brand, and then other people would drink it and think that's the worst thing ever,
Yeah.
And so coffee in general is going to be consumed however bad it is. I feel like that's kind of a proven point, right? However good, however bad. I think a lot of it's nostalgia. I think a lot of it's what people are used to. The very first time I ever had wine, I was like, oh my gosh, why do people drink this, And then you fast forward to now, you're like, I love wine. Wine is amazing, I think within each different brew method, there's a pour over, a French press, coffee maker, espresso especially, there are rules that if you follow them, they will make better coffee. I think objectively, now what one you like better out of that is subjective, not everybody likes espresso at all, even if it's great espresso. Some people are like, that's disgusting. I like my drip coffee. In fact, training employees over the years, it was always funny because some people had never had espresso before and they loved our coffee. We made them some shots and I'm drinking and thinking, this is awesome. And they're like, this is so gross, but they're trying to keep a good face,
Yeah.
Because they feel weird about it,
Yeah, they're like, I'm working at a coffee shop and I can't say this is disgusting.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it's your palate, but which develops a lot over time, the more you drink and the more you're exposed to different things. But I don't think there's one right pour over recipe. I don't think there's one right French press recipe, but I do think there are rules about them and science behind them that makes a better cup of coffee than others. So all that to say, I think you can get more out of coffee. Maybe the diplomatic answer is you can get more out of coffee the more you know what you like and the more you experiment with it, and the more, especially one huge thing for coffee is having some controls, right? Control the variables, have correct water temperature, have correct grind size, have for whatever you're doing. And if you start having things like a cheap Amazon scale or something like that, or a kettle that heats the water to 190 degrees or something, then you're going to start making better coffee just because, probably mainly just because you're having some intentionality about it,
When Casey mentioned the intentionality of making coffee, I thought about traveling to Japan last year. If you want to hear more about this trip, listen to my photography episode from last season. But some of my favorite moments from that trip were the coffee shops where we witnessed this intentional process of making an incredible cup of coffee. There wasn't this hustle and bustle culture around getting the cup of coffee as fast as possible. We stood in line for 20 minutes one time for coffee, and it was worth it. There was an intentionality about the patience, the quality of the product, and the experience of consuming it in a beautiful space that was unlike any type of coffee culture that I had interacted with. And I think it feels and tastes different, right? A coffee at an airport versus a coffee at your favorite local coffee shop are two very different experiences because of the intentionality of the cup. But in contrast, I could argue that a cup of coffee served in a styrofoam cup before a volunteer event or an AA meeting in a church basement tastes different and feels different as well, even if the coffee comes from a big-ass can. It's because the consumer knows that there was intentionality behind the cup of coffee. There was love. Director David Lynch allegedly once said, quote, "Even bad coffee is better than no coffee at all." And I'd like to alter that a bit and say, even bad coffee is good if it's served with intentionality. Speaking of bad versus good coffee, I asked Casey what people usually don't know about the coffee industry.
One thing that I noticed is, like, obviously having been in this industry since 2009, there's lots of different trends, right? And so when we first got in, it was like real trendy to support fair trade, which was a great movement. That's an awesome movement. So trend, I'm not trying to like put down that it's a trend. It's a great movement. Over time, it became apparent that like the fair trade coffee was at the cheaper end of the spectrum, and more dramatic things needed to happen in terms of like getting better quality coffee, but also paying farmers more. So that's when you kind of got into like the direct trade movement. And that's really important, to pay farmers higher prices and get better coffee. Like, everybody wins, right? We, especially as the end consumer, win. And so there's a lot of people don't understand how coffee is bought in the world and how it makes it to America. You know, so I feel like I'm always having to educate people on like how that process works. And, you know, it really just comes down to like paying people great prices. But like, one thing that's happening right now, for example, is like there is this world crisis where Ethiopian coffee was not getting exported for like the last, oh my gosh, like 4 or 5 months. So I think I ordered it in like April maybe, and it just arrived like yesterday. And so I think one thing that maybe people don't know is like how much world events impact coffee. You know, like you have the Ethiopian coffee is not leaving. And so then those containers were already spoken for, which we all know how this went down during COVID. So then the containers that were supposed to be used in South America now are backed up. And then you don't get South American coffee now because of the container shortage. So it just causes a lot of problems. So I think one thing that's cool about coffee is it really is amazing that this coffee makes it to our doorstep every day, and we're able to drink these outstanding cups of coffee in our homes, because it takes a lot to get it from there to us, you know? And so that's kind of a cool thing that I like to tell people about with coffee. And then the other thing is like a lot of the terminology surrounding coffee is not always the same. So what means one thing to somebody might not mean the same thing to someone else. So for example, there's a lot of like language that's clever marketing. You know, like one of the big marketing things right now is like mold-free coffee. And that is just, I don't know who started it. That's just, I don't even get it.
Some marketing executive was like,
yeah,
the mold. People don't like the mold.
Yeah, we got them. Yeah, because I actually took like a 16-week class on that. It was a whole other story, but I took like a 16-week class where they were talking about coffee is considered like a low risk food, yet almost all coffee has trace amounts of like bacteria on it in its green form, which won't really make you sick, but if you consumed a lot of it, somehow it would make you sick. But who's eating a lot of green coffee? Like nobody. Yeah, because you can't even digest it, really. Like you can't chew it. It's so hard, right? Which is why cats, they have that famous cat that eats the coffee and poops it out, and people pay a bunch of money for it. Yeah. But my point in saying that is like, there's a lot of marketing around coffee that I'm always trying to educate people. Like, okay, the most important thing is to buy ethically sourced coffee, which normally goes hand in hand with it being grown to organic standards, if not organic certified, which is also good for your health. So if you're like ticking those 2 boxes, maybe just don't worry about anything else. except for whether you like it or not, because there's plenty of coffee that if you just don't like it, don't buy it, you know?
Besides going to reverentcoffee.com and clicking an order, that's what you could do first, listeners. If they were going to a local grocery store where they buy their coffee and they were looking at the packaging, what tips would you have? What things would you like, hey, be cautious about that? Or what should you look for generally when you're looking at a package of coffee on the supermarket shelf?
The first tip I will give you is always check and see if there's a roasted on date, or if there's not a roasted on date, that means that they didn't want to include it. The sell by date would be my next thing that I would look at, because a lot of the coffee that sits in a grocery store is like very old. It's like 5-6 months old. Now, there are, like, our local Vons has a Starbucks inside of it. So I know for a fact theirs gets restocked more than the other brands because they have a Starbucks inside. But just check like the sell by date, the roasted date. I would try to shop for someone small. Organic certification in those circumstances, I think, is a good thing. For people like me who aren't organic certified, it's because about half the coffee I buy is organic certified. The other half is not, because the farmers are so small that they're never going to pay for that. They're not going to pay $10,000 to get like certified to be organic, you know, on like a 4-acre farm or something. There's not. The organic certification from a big company, I think, probably means a little bit more, because then they are buying organic coffee. So that's what I would do in a grocery store. And then, of course, if you can, know your preference. Like, do I like light roast? Do I like medium roast? Do I like dark roast? Because the more you can learn about what you like, then the better choices you'll make in terms of buying coffee, because you may not know if you like a medium roast. Maybe you think you like a dark roast, and then you try a medium roast and you're like, whoa, I like this, you know? I would say if you have the opportunity, try to go to like a local coffee shop and buy their coffee, because that's going to be the freshest by far. I mean, I know when we were buying coffee, before I even started roasting coffee, our coffee was never older than like 2 weeks old in our shop. It was normally like a week old, to be honest with you. And so like that goes a long way in terms of just tasting better, because coffee loses so much of its flavor when it gets stale because it loses its aroma. And aroma is a massive part of coffee tasting good. So, and then of course, final thing, if people can grind their own coffee, that's always going to taste better. If they can't, I get it. It's hard, but a lot of grocery store coffees are ground too, which that also makes them more stale. So
when you mentioned aroma, I'm like, oh, that's it. Like for me, the aroma, I'm the weirdo. I will stick my face into like, I have it in a closed like Tupperware container. I stick my face into the pile of beans every morning because
me too, man.
And then I do it when I grind it. It's like, but it's crazy that that's such an important part of it. Like it's like before you even
it's a massive part. It's a massive part. Yeah. And in fact, if you can get in the process of it, it's a weird thing to do, but if you can like breathe in through your nose while you're sipping coffee and like kind of like slurp it, that's how coffee professionals taste coffee. And it's not refined. I would not just probably not do it in public. People might think you're like super weird.
It's not like wine tasting where it's like very delicate.
No, but if you can do that, like maybe after a couple sips, you start getting so much more out of the coffee. It's called like coffee slurping. It's like kind of weird, but try it and let me know how that works.
I will. I'll start slurping. All right, Casey, I'm going to try the slurp method. I just hope I don't shoot coffee up my nose. Here we go. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's not dignified, but it sure is effective. And that's a damn fine cup of coffee. This is obviously, you've been in this industry, you're a coffee consumer. It's a big, big industry. Like we can't tackle all the nuances of it today in our conversation.
Yeah.
But in your own personal opinion, Why do you think people love coffee outside of the caffeine benefits and energy?
Yeah.
Why do you think people love it?
One of the reasons I think people love coffee so much is what, like we talked about, the ritual of it, the morning ritual of it. I know that when I've been on like diets and like cleanses and stuff where I didn't drink coffee for even like a week, I was just like, man, I'm just like bummed in the morning. Like it's not fun, you know? I like waking up and the ritual of making coffee and sitting and just being quiet and stuff. So I think there's that element of it. But then I also think that it's kind of like when you follow a sports team, you know, or you follow like a brand. You're like, I'm part of this community of people who likes this. And you find a certain identity in that. And so I think, you know, like you look at like a real diehard Starbucks customer, they're like about that brand, you know? I think people just really like feeling involved in that. You really see it, especially in the independent specialty coffee industry. It's not now, but in the beginning it was more fractured. So you had like people who maybe really loved Stumptown coffee. Maybe you had people who really loved Intelligentsia or like these other companies that are kind of like now synonymous with the beginning of what's called third wave coffee, independent coffee shops. But now now looking at the industry, you have almost these like overarching groups that are maybe part of like these specialty coffee association stuff, who it's like cool to be an independent coffee and you're just part of the crew just by being an independent coffee in general, which didn't really used to be a thing. It used to be like real brand specific, you know? And I think a lot of things like, you know, the World Barista Championship and all these like big, you know, competitions and that have created like a culture around that. But also, you know, people are just, the consumer itself has just gotten a lot more comfortable with buying independent coffee and stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about that, like how cool it feels when you go to a city and you find this amazing little coffee shop and you're like, this is awesome. You know, like I can think of one I went to traveling in Omaha. We found this shop and I just remember it like blew me away. This is a long time ago. I forget how many years this was, but it blew me away. And I was like, I was not expecting that this coffee would be so outstanding, you know?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's like so fun to find that. And I think that that's what gets people so excited about coffee. And kind of going back to the point of like community, like it's really fun in a small town to have a community around you that's like proud of what you do. And so I think that that's kind of what people like about it. Let me turn that on you. What do you think people like about it?
I think that's exactly, you answered it perfectly. That's like that's the answer of my podcast, where it's awesome. The least important things, where it's just coffee, but it's not coffee. And I think it's true. Especially I think about the health trends and, you know, people are trying to, you know, not have as much caffeine. And it's like, well, you switch to energy drink with vitamins and like I think there's something visceral about the coffee bean, the product, this crop that is grown, and this is almost this ancient ritual. And it's similar to tea that way, but it's like this ancient ritual of like, I'm making a product and it's not created in a lab somewhere. It's not. Yeah, totally. You know, you're taking the beans, you're grinding it up, and it's your water and the ground beans, and you're making something. I think that is why it's eternal, and it's continuing and will continue, even with all the health trends and other you know, competitor type of beverages. Like coffee will still reign supreme because of that.
Yeah, that's very, very well said. I like that. Because I mean, you are having to craft something every day just to consume the product, right?
Yeah.
You know, however that looks like to you, whether it's as little effort or as much effort as you want, you're still making something every day, which I think kind of speaks to our creative nature, you know?
For someone who has earned most of his living through working on a computer, coffee serves as a visceral creation experience at the beginning of the day, where in a few minutes I can participate in a tangible process with a physical outcome. To have a little moment where I'm crafting something at the start of the day reminds me that I'm human, that I'm here. So why does this magical bean bring so much to our lives? I think it's part of the rhythmic nature of being human. I think coffee is such a powerful sensory experience, both making it and consuming it, that as humans, we can't help ourselves to incorporate it as part of our day. And no matter what changes over time, whether it's health trends, whether it's a reduction in caffeine intake, whether it's an abandoning of coffee altogether, I still think this magical bean, this beautiful process of making coffee is so visceral, tactile, and human that coffee will stand the test of time. That in the future, it will still be integral to our daily lives, to connecting, to grounding ourselves, and remembering that it only takes a few ingredients and a little muscle to make something beautiful.